In this series of how-to videos, we're focusing on specific uses of Codeit. These short videos will walk you through the features and steps you can use in Codeit to accomplish certain types of tasks. Today we're looking at how to use the Codeit API. Hi. Today we're going to take a technical look at the process of working with the Codeit API to read and write data to and from Codeit. Codeit makes it very easy to import data using the inbuilt import wizard, and it's also very easy to export data using the export wizard. But if you want to eliminate the need for manual intervention like this, then one way you can achieve this is by working with the Codeit API. So this video is aimed at developers who are interested in integrating their own in-house systems with Codeit so that text data from these systems can be categorized and tagged. To get started, you'll need an authentication token to communicate with the Codeit API. So within the admin section, you can click a user to view their API key, or you can click the link to create one and copy it to the clipboard. Once you've got hold of an API access key, one of the easiest ways of getting familiar with the API and the methods that it contains is our Swagger documentation page here, which you can find under codeitapp.com/swagger. You paste in your API key in the top right hand corner there, and then you're free to access any of the methods listed within the documentation page. So just to show you a very simple example of that in action, we can call the get method here on projects, which will then return back a list of projects associated with the account that's associated with the API key, and return those as a list of JSON objects. So within this Swagger page, there's lots of documentation around what each method does and what the expected inputs and outputs for each method are. So that's a very good way of getting up to speed with the methods that are supported and sort of how to work with them. Another very popular tool for testing out APIs and getting familiar with the methods that they provide is the Postman tool, which you can see here. And so I've just set this up with the API URL here, which is api.codeitapp.com, and because we're using basic authentication, it's important to include the API access key that we saw earlier, and include it under Codeit access key custom header, and with that in place you can hit send. Set of results as we saw before in the Swagger page. You've got a set of projects returned back from this method. So there's some basic tools for just testing out the API and getting started, and I'm assuming you're probably already quite familiar with both of those tools, or very similar tools. But what I'd like to focus on next is the process of writing your own code to talk to our API. So as the Codeit API is a REST API, obviously you're at liberty to use whatever programming language you're comfortable with to talk to that API. But today we're going to just look at how you might target the Codeit API using .NET, specifically C#. So here we've got a C# project, so just a empty console app, and obviously I could write code that talks directly to the API using HTTP client or REST sharp, but to make that life just a little bit easier, there's actually a NuGet package that's available that effectively wraps the REST API and just provides an object model that you can work with instead of having to sort of deal with the API directly if you prefer. So I'm just going to show you that basic setup. So to find the Codeit API library, just search for Codeit in NuGet, and it should appear here, Codeit API library. And then once that's installed, then the library should be available for you to work with. Now the starting point in using this library is to instantiate a server to work with. And obviously in the constructor of that server you're passing in the API authentication key that we saw earlier. There are actually three types of server in the API. So there's actually a config server that will get you the configuration information, so things like projects and tasks and waves and questions and all that sort of thing. There's also a server that will manage the input and output of data. I'm going to look at that in a minute, a bit later. And then there's also a logging server which you can use to get information from logs and from stats and that kind of thing. So let's have a look at some of the methods that this server exposes, and you'll see here that there's basically a one-to-one mapping here between the methods available in the server and the methods exposed by the API. So obviously, yeah, this library is just a wrapper around the API, so that's as you'd expect. So we could get a list of projects, for example, by calling list projects. And away we go. But to help speed things up a bit more, we have a sample project which you can download and use as a starting point, and I'd like to show you that next. So to get started with the sample project that we provide, you first have to head over to our help site, codeit.fyi, and towards the bottom of this page you'll see a link to the Codeit API demo application. So on this page there's a bit of description about what the application does, and there's a download link at the bottom here, so you can click that to download the application, and you can use that as a starting point for your own integration work. So I'm just going to give you a quick demonstration of how that application works. So once you've downloaded the demo application and unzipped it and opened it up in Visual Studio, you'll notice that there are 3 projects within the solution. The first of which, this common project here, just really acts as a repository for the various settings that the other 2 projects need to use. So the first job in using this application is make sure you've got a project set up on Codeit, and make sure that you have your API key and the various sort of ID values for the project task and wave that you're targeting in this project. And the second project in this solution is a console app, and the third is a web app. And actually the console app and the web app pretty much do the same thing, so I'm just going to focus on the web app today. It's an MVC web application. There's obviously a home controller for an index page, and we've got one controller that can read records from Codeit and another controller here that can write them. So I'm just going to run the project and we'll have a look at how that operates in a bit more detail. So here we see the web application running. It's a very simple index page here. You can see that there's a button I can press to go to the section that writes records, and another button I can press here that can go to the read records page. So let's click that one first, and you'll see that the API, or rather the web app, has read a set of records for a given project via the API. And if we compare that to how that looks in Codeit itself, you'll see that it's actually identical. We've got the same 8 records here displayed as here. Okay, so we know that we can read records from Codeit. Let's try out the write records. Now let's say here I type great food and age 21. You'll see that when it returns, the web app returns you back to the read records page, and you can see that our new record here, great food, has been added. It also looks like it's been assigned code 1, so we'll have a look at why that might be over here in Codeit. So if I refresh the page, you'll see that great food has been added, which is great, and it has been coded as code 1. So this is just an example of the Codeit AI doing its work. Depending on your settings, when you write data to Codeit, it will attempt to automatically apply codes to the text that you feed in, and then that means that that data can be read straight back out again via the API as coded data, which is great. So in this case, it's very easy for the AI to code this item because it matches both previous items that have been coded as code 1, and it also matches the text in the code frame. So that's pretty categorical and easy for the AI to code. Okay, so let's just try that again with a slightly different example. Imagine we say delicious food and friendly waiter. Pick a random age here, 47. So when the web app has written that data to Codeit, it returns back to the read records page again here, and we can see our verbatim is appearing here and has been coded as code 1 and 2. And again, we can go back to Codeit here and just confirm that that's the same on both sides. So again, delicious food and friendly waiter has been coded as great food and good service. Hopefully that short video has provided you with a few useful pointers and will help you get started using the Codeit API. Obviously, if you get stuck or you have questions or you want to know more, feel free to get in touch with us via our web address, which is on screen here, digitaltaxonomy.co.uk.